History can account for a number of absolute monarchs who had the potential to do a great evil. The authority of this nature gave several rulers their free hand, exercising unparalleled cruelty, oppression, and terror to an extent which those nations would ever remember, as well as the world at large. In this tour inside the lives of 5 of the most ill-famed and infamous kings and queens, we will present 5 rulers in this account who gained infamy as the synonyms for evil among the worst monarchs to have ever reigned because of their brutal activities and unrelenting desire for power. Ivan IV. Better known under the sobriquet Ivan the Terrible, Ivan IV was the first Tsar of Russia and certainly remains one of the most infamous persons hailing from Russian history. His reign can be viewed by many historians as being divided into 2 periods, comprising in his early years, during which he expanded and modernized Russia, and in his later years when insanity, paranoia, and reign terror marked the period. The cruelty began after the death of his beloved wife, Anastasia Romanovna, in 1560, which many believe led to a drastic change in his personality. The Oprichnina, a reign of terror. Ivan introduced the Oprichnina, the state-controlled territory led directly by the ruler and policed by his personal secret police, the Oprichniki. This novel policy gave him unparalleled power over a great swath of the country. The Oprichniki were notorious in their violence. Mass executions, torture, and the expropriation of land from boyars were common. They would ride through towns clad in black to represent death and fear, leaving scenes of devastation in their wake. From among his egregious acts, one should point out the sacking of Novgorod in 1570. Ivan suspected that this city was on the verge of betrayal and sided with Poland. He ordered a bloodbath. His soldiers killed en masse, not sparing anybody from rich, influential families to commoners. Afterwards, Novgorod was turned into a devastated settlement. Such actions by Ivan showed his full spiral into madness, inspired by suspiciousness and the striving for absolute power. The murder of his own son. Probably the most personal tragedy of Ivan's reign was the death of his son, Ivan Ivanovich, which occurred in 1581. Ivan, in his anger, struck his son with a staff in an argument and killed him. This became a point of no return for Ivan, and according to many accounts, he spent the rest of his life overcome with grief and remorse. His cruelties did not stop with his people, but also extended further into his family, giving him solid reinforcement as a tyrant. Emperor Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, known simply as Nero, was the 5th emperor of Rome and is considered one of the most notorious figures in Roman history. Nero's rule began promisingly but descended into the dissolute, cruel, and insane. His name has become synonymous with tyranny and corruption. The Great Fire of Rome. Perhaps the most incessant story about Nero is his purported association with the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. According to several ancient sources, either Nero ordered the conflagration to be set so that he might build his fantastic palace, the Domus Aurea, or was too busy playing his fiddle to respond to the disaster. That picture of Nero is quite debated among historians. The image does summarize the decadence and the disregard for his people that characterize his reputation. After the fire, Nero seized tremendous portions of the destroyed city to build his Golden House, an extensive property with luxurious parks, artificial ponds, and a colossal statue of himself. Apparently unconcerned about the suffering of the people, also infuriated the feelings of the population against him. Persecution of Christians. After the fire, it was convenient for Nero to find scapegoats on whom to throw the blame. He directed his anger against the growing Christian population in Rome, blaming them for being incendiaries. The consequence of this was one of the earliest great persecutions of Christians, wherein believers were tortured and murdered in horrible manners, such as being burned alive or torn to pieces by wild beasts in the arena. Nero's cruelty against the Christians set in concrete his legacy as a ruthless and callous leader. Murder and madness. His cruelties extended to his own family, as Nero ordered the murder of his mother, Agrippina the Younger. She had helped him rise, but whom he came to perceive as a threat, and forced his wife Octavia into exile and later executed her. His cruelty combined with his debauchery and extravagance led to widespread discontent, eventually resulting in his overthrow and suicide in 68 AD. His rule was one of utter descent into madness, with replete paranoia, megalomania, and a disregard for human life in its entirety. Queen Ranavalona was. Ranavalona I was described as the Mad Queen of Madagascar, who approached the throne in 1828 and ruled with an iron fist for a considerable period into 1861. She ran a very isolated regime characterized by brutality, with a policy of xenophobia that brought massive death and suffering to the populace. Reign of Terror, Ranavalona achieved her power through the execution of political rivals, some by crude, cold-blooded methods. Immediately, she set out to establish a regime of terror where heavy punishment awaited all those opposed to her. One of the favorite methods of execution was known as tangena, a trial by poison, wherein the accused had to swallow poison. If he survived, then he was proclaimed innocent. This is the cruelest form of cruel practice, which is estimated to have killed hundreds of thousands of people. Anti-European policies. The isolationist policies of Ranavalona led to the expulsion of almost all the Europeans from Madagascar. She vigorously opposed Christianity and persecuted native converts along with missionaries. Foreigners who refused to renounce faith were tortured, executed, or taken into labor camps. Her hostility to outsiders, combined with her desire to keep Madagascar free of foreign influences, created an unabated bloodbath. Decline and suffering. Under the rule of Ranavalona, the economy and society of Madagascar suffered a great deal. The population was driven to military campaigns, projects of labor, and building fortresses. All this coupled with continuous famines and plagues accentuated by her policies. She was so brutal in her rule that an estimate suggests the population of Madagascar fell by half during her reign, from 5 million to 2.5 million. King Leopold II. King Leopold II of Belgium earned infamy for the brutal exploitation of the Congo Free State, a vast tract of land in Central Africa belonging to him personally from 1885 until 1908. In the disguise of a mission civilisatrice, Leopold turned the Congo into his personal fiefdom, one of exploitation of natural resources, basically rubber, at the terrible cost of millions of lives. The Congo Free State, a nightmare of exploitation. The reign of Leopold over the Congo was extremely cruel. Native people were put to work in order to collect the product under the worst conditions and often at gunpoint. Failure to provide quotes was punished with whippings, mutilation, or executions. Among the most notorious methods of punishment was the cutting off of hands, a terrorizing method of holding the local population in obedience. The human cost from the exploitation of Leopold is tragic. Historians estimate that as many as 10 million Congolese died in his name, through forced labor, starvation, disease, and violence. The extent of this mass killing, added to the systemic abuse perpetrated, has enshrined Leopold as one of the most evil monarchs ever to have lived. International outcry and Leopold's fall. Eventually, it was Leopold's atrocities that drew international condemnation. In the vanguard, in fact, writers and activists like Mark Twain and Ed Morel led campaigns that exposed the atrocities of his rule. Indeed, the pressure was at its zenith when, in 1908, Leopold was compelled to give up the Congo to the Belgian government. He lived a life of wealth and luxury even after having lost control, having immensely profited through the exploitation of the Congo, while the region continued to bear the brunt of his rule for generations. 1. Empress Zetian, China, 690–705 AD. Zetian is the only empress in Chinese history who reigned during the Tang dynasty and is best remembered by her ruthlessness in ascending to power. Though an effective ruler and having been a significant stabilizing and expanding force for the empire, her reign was characteristically filled with manipulation, cruelty, and elimination of anyone standing in her path. The rise to power, Zetian was a concubine when she started her political career, but by removing her rivals and establishing herself as the emperor's favorite, she rose in her position. Then, when he died, she consolidated her position through court political manipulation to the extent that exile and execution were administered to some of her children so they would not threaten her rule. Brutality and control Wu became infamous due to the merciless purging of the court by her. She formed a secret police force for monitoring the aristocracy for any signs of disloyalty and reporting them. People presumed to be conspirators were tortured, exiled, or executed. With fear and repression, Wu kept the empire under her control, hence earning the role of a tyrant despite her good political acumen. Legacy. While the rule of Wu Zetian was marked by ruthless means, at the same time she was an able and far-sighted ruler who encouraged able administrators and initiated the process of strengthening the economy and military of China. Her legacy was multifaceted, combining good governance with incredible cruelty. However, her violent means of staying in power have darkened her feats, making her one of the most unpopular characters in Chinese history. Conclusion. These monarchs' stories almost remind one of the dark side of absolute power. From Ivan the Terrible's paranoia-fueled reasoning to the long history of powerful rulers, marks have been left in human civilization, with their people bearing all sorts of cruelty and malevolence. These rulers who commanded vast empires used absolute power with inconsequential values on human life, thus indulging in massive destructions, bloodstains, and suffering at an unimaginable scale. Thank you for spending time with us through Spookscope today. Feel free to share your knowledge and wisdom in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and family. Until next time, my dear spooker, stay curious.